So welcome. I'm Marty Zide, and my career has mostly been in network television. So I was a producer for ABC 2020, 48 Hours Mystery at CBS, and now making a documentary on the human voice. If you were here last year, you might have seen the trailer. You're going to see it again, too bad. And I teach at Drexel. I teach television production at Drexel. So what we're going to talk about a little bit, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the kind of film you're making, but we're going to talk a little bit about documentaries. And the question has been raised, what can you do a documentary about? And the answer is just about anything. The best stories are human stories. Any story with human drama can usually make for a good documentary. People's stories are always the best and most interesting, in my opinion. Something controversial can be a documentary, something informative, something surprising, like going back to the momentous election that we just had. And I say momentous, although it's not exactly how I feel about it, but there are so many things that could have been, like if you had done this prior to the election and then after, you'd have had a great documentary. Like, supposing you were following the Trump camp around prior to the election, and then you're also with them the night that he got elected. That would be a phenomenal, it'd be really interesting to see the backstory. It's okay. Similarly, if you were with the Clinton camp, that would have been pretty interesting too. Like, that night of the election, there were a lot of people like this. And so following, Hillary Clinton and her supporters would have been really interesting to get behind the scenes of strategy and then to ultimately see the defeat and how it affected her. Even going around your own city, your own neighborhood, your own peer group, and finding out reaction to the election would make for an interesting documentary. You know why? Because it affects people and it affects their lives. And so kind of anything that affects our lives makes for an interesting documentary. Like I listed a few things. So if there's controversy, if there's struggle, if there's a twist in the story, if something happens that we didn't expect, if there's something shocking, something revealing, informative, those things work. Some of the most popular documentaries, like if you go to iTunes, you'll see there's one that was out a couple of years ago called Restrepo. That was the documentary maker was embedded with troops in Afghanistan. And so you're getting a behind the scenes, behind the headlines look at what it's like to be a soldier in Afghanistan. There's the, has anyone seen 20 Feet from Stardom? You guys know that one? It's great. You should rent it if you can find it. So 20 Feet from Stardom won the Oscar 2015, I think. That's a story about these backup singers who never made it to the forefront of the industry. They were always kind of in the background. They were always 20 feet from stardom. So, it's 4 profiles of women who sang backup for Rolling Stones, Luther Vandross, and their struggle to try to make it is really dramatic and also very uplifting. Searching for Sugar Man. You guys know that one? You know that one? So that's the producer of that documentary learns that, I think it's in the Caribbean, there's this guy, Mexican-American guy who was this gigantic hit. His music is loved in the Caribbean, but this guy had never heard of him. So the music was from like the 70s. So the producer was like, whatever happened to this guy? And he eventually tracks him down. He's living, I think, in Detroit. He's like living way off the grid in a very humble setting. And you get to find out what happened to this guy's career. Here, it looked like he was going to be super hot. Here, like in the Caribbean, people love him and are still buying his records. This guy's not seeing a dime from it. And as the story winds on, the producer winds up convincing Sugarman to go back and resume his career. Does a live concert. I'm not sure if he made a recording. So it's a phenomenal story. And then even beyond that, unexpectedly, so that's that documentary. But unexpectedly, the filmmaker wins an Oscar for it, and a year later commits suicide, throws himself in front of a train. So the follow-up story to that documentary would probably be really interesting and compelling and revealing. And again, you don't want to be exploitative, like I wouldn't want to have exploited this producer, but it sure is interesting that the guy strived and strived for years to make this film, finally made it. It exceeds his wildest dreams, and then a year later he decides to take his own life. So stories about how we live our lives make good documentaries. You know, what we eat, what we're doing with the environment. Anything that has controversy in it can make for a good story. Are any of you guys doing like as your short film documentary style? Good. So I'm going to ask you probably to come on up and talk for a minute. So the documentary I'm making is about the human voice and all about how we use it. I've been working at it for a pretty long time. Just did a crowdfunding campaign for it over the summer. That was pretty successful. And that's the only way I'm going to finish it, is by raising enough money to get to the finish line. So I'm going to show you the trailer. I'm sorry. Again, I apologize if you've seen it before, but hope you enjoy it.
Has emerged. You think, I don't know who this is that's coming through me.
Oh, well, it was getting me kicked out of class, for sure.
I kept it secret.
So I knew something was going on.
The voice is very powerful because it comes from deep within us.
We project our personalities, establish our credibility, and often make our livings with our voices.
Well, everybody in my family was a singer. I sang because I couldn't not sing.
You fool! You idiot! I figured out that I could do screwy things with my voice when I was a very little kid.
Like on planet Earth, there are billions and billions of voices. One note.
Fly me to the moon.
And you're like, Frank.
Play up there with
The voice is an exquisite messenger of emotion. There is no musical instrument quite so compelling as the human voice.
I've been so many places.
There's something in his voice that is the joy and the pain. Just the actual sound of his voice could bring me to tears.
Backing up my life in stages.
We don't think about our voices nearly as much as we should until we lose them.
Oh, I was terrified. I mean, I couldn't figure out what was wrong, and I just thought, well, I'm not working hard enough. Parkinson's disease took my voice away. So I just thought, I can't sing anymore because the audience doesn't need to hear that.
So it links our insides, if you like, with our outsides.
So what is it?
My voice is a blessing and a gift, and it's clearly on loan. Singing the song.
I can go boo-boo, I wish I had my voice back until I'm 90, and it's not going to bring it back.
Singing the song to you.
That is your voice.
Thank you. So let's start out with some questions about what you... Hands up. I have bruised ribs. Don't make me laugh. How about some questions? What questions do you have about what you just saw? Nothing? Yeah, thank you.
So my kids are starting out, and you've got a long resume behind you, so I imagine it's easier to approach all of those very famous people. For somebody starting out, how do they best go about building their credibility so that they can get access to people like that?
Well, the hardest thing to do, first of all, is just to ask. You know, you have to get out of your comfort zone to ask. Like every single person that is in that trailer is someone I pursued. And yes, I may have some kind of reputation, but each person or group that agreed to be in that agreed for a different reason. And so, first things first, you have to ask, because as I often say, the worst thing that can happen is you hear no, and then you move on. But you'll never know until you ask. So, other ways, there's no shortcut. You know, you have to maybe work in the industry. You maybe have to gain a reputation of some sort by being in the biz. But you'd be surprised how many people will help you just if you ask. I mean, especially if you're making a student film. I don't think there's anybody that's going to be cold-hearted enough to say, you're not important enough for me. I think everyone realizes that they were students too, so, you know, at one time. Just got to start by asking.
But so in asking though, you must have some kind of passion behind why you're making this. You're not just getting,
Absolutely.
Video, do you mind sitting here and answering some questions about it? You must have some kind of connection to
Absolutely.
why you're making this. So how did you, I'm wondering, how did you come to this topic? Why the human voice?
That's a great question. So I was in third grade at the William B. Mann School, 54th and Berks. And I was in the school auditorium, and I was listening, it was with my mom, we were listening to a sixth grader sing on the stage. And somewhere in there, I started to cry. I was so embarrassed. You know, I was sitting with my mom, my classmates were all around me, and there I was bawling. And it took me years to figure out why I was crying, but it finally came to me that this kid's voice had actually moved me to tears. He was singing in a very sweet, tender way, in a high, like a falsetto, and I got overwhelmed. So that was my first experience in realizing how powerful the human voice is. And then through my years, I did a lot of a cappella singing. At the Brook, you know, I did a lot of street corner doo-wop stuff and soul and R&B, and then in college I sang in glee clubs and choirs and barbershop quartets, and even a few years ago I sang in a gospel group a cappella. So I love the sound of the human voice, and I love especially harmony, vocal harmony. And then working in network television, I was around all these people with these great... I didn't do it. Thank you. I was around all these people with these booming, incredible voices that had phenomenal control over their voices, and it just hit me like, this is something I love. And so you're right. I didn't go asking people, just kind of calmly saying blah, 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 blah. I came at it like, I'm doing this film about something I love. I would love to include you. Your voice is fantastic, A, B, C, D, and E. But all of it took a lot of hard work and hustle. Like Linda Ronstadt, only the old heads in here will know who Linda Ronstadt is, right? But I don't expect any of you guys to. But anyway, she was this super hot singer in the like 70s. She sold 100 million records, hard rocker, beautiful, powerful voice. And so she's losing her voice to Parkinson's disease. So there was, for me, a twist in the story. You know, your voice is great, it does this, that, and the other thing, but what happens if you lose it? And so her identity was tied up in her voice. I mean, she made a living from it. She's been singing all of her life, and now she can't sing, and she's losing her voice. So in order to get an interview with Linda Ronstadt, my reputation played a small part, but not very large. I just started to ask around friends that I knew, people in the music business, who her agent was, and somebody gave me a name. Then I found out that Linda was going to be at the Library of Congress. She had come out with an autobiography, Library of Congress in DC. And I knew what her agent looked like. I'd seen pictures of him by that point. And I went down to DC and I saw him there and I approached him and I told him what I was doing and why. And he said yes. You know, he said he would ask Linda about it, and she said yes. And, you know, even to make that happen took months. She was ill. You know, I'd schedule a camera crew. We'd be ready to go. She'd be ill, have to reschedule. A lot of back and forth. But all of these people that I approached took effort. Did you guys recognize Michael Winslow? Anybody know who he is? That's the guy who is in Police Academy, 1 through 7, I think. So he's the voice sound effects guy, not the Ren and Stimpy guy, but the other guy. And so Michael Winslow, I saw him on a Geico commercial. Geico used to have this ad campaign a couple of years ago where they'd match like a B-list celebrity with a real person. And the real person would say, I crashed my car, and then the B-list celebrity would do some bit or some shtick, you know, about something related. So anyway, I saw Michael Winslow on this commercial. You know, the real person says, I crashed my car. And then Michael Winslow sitting next to him going, you know, making all the sound effects, even subtle to the point of the guy says, and Geico wrote me a check. And there's Michael Winslow with his voice doing, you know, the sound of the signature on a piece of paper. I thought, wow, this guy is outstanding. So I decided I wanted to put him in the film, and I found out who his agent was, and I called him, and the agent said, I want some outrageous amount of money to ask Michael if he's going to be in it. And I was like, I don't have that outrageous amount of money. The guy said, okay, see you later, bye. And so I stewed about it. I thought, how can I possibly make some impact? And I did the same thing. I went to New York. I stopped in to see the agent. And while I was in there trying to convince the guy that I couldn't pay, you know, thousands of dollars, Michael Winslow called. He called while I was actually in the office, and the agent said, here, you tell him what you're thinking about doing. And I got Michael Winslow on the phone, and he was like, I'm in. But it took my passion to make that happen, and it took some incredible serendipity to make that happen. So, effort. You know, you've probably heard that expression, great things happen, 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. I really believe in that. Effort can make up for a lot of shortcomings, and it can also, if you just have an attitude of, I'm not stopping until I get this done, it will really serve you. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
I know in some documentaries, it's kind of hard for people to open up. So what do you do, like, to make them from?
You mean when you're interviewing someone? In my world, it takes a while to usually set up the cameras and the lights. There's usually, you know, in the professional world, it might take an hour or an hour and a half just to set up the lights. So during that time before the interview starts, I just try to chat, get the person to know me a little bit, that I'm not some scary, snappy, slick, you know, producer from, you know, I live in Philly, but, you know, a lot of my work was in New York, so I always had to convince people that I wasn't just some, you know, slick salesman. And I think a lot of times once people get to know you and they see that you're earnest and that your heart's in the right place, they relax a little bit. And then sometimes you actually have to coach them and say, take it down a notch, you know, I'm not trying to hurt you. You know, but I think it's just kind of, you use your heart. I guess like you would do with anybody who was, if somebody's anxious, you try to just do whatever say whatever you could to calm them down. Any other questions?
I guess sort of two-part. Is the Linda Ronstadt part of your documentary kind of the story, the emotional part of it? Did you already have that lined up? Did you know she had Parkinson's, or did you find that out afterwards?
Yeah, I knew she had Parkinson's before I pursued her.
Kind of your hook for that?
Yeah,
If you don't necessarily have, we've got a couple of good ideas on documentaries. It's things that kids are passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to go do interviews, but they don't necessarily know what's going to come of the interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Are you just shooting like crazy to get as much as you can and see what?
If you can, I mean, it's always a good thing to research. And so before I shot anything, I tried to figure out who I wanted to include in the film. And you know, since I'm a huge a cappella fan, Take Six I've loved since the late 80s. And so that was another ask where I just found who their agent was and I asked. And I told him what I was doing and how passionate I was and how much I loved the group. And he said yes. Then I had to convince the Blue Note Jazz Cafe in New York to allow me to shoot there. Everything is an ask, pretty much. And, you know, I heard no plenty of times along the way. But I got yes quite a few times too. I included Layla Hathaway. You guys saw her in the trailer. I included her because I was a big fan of hers, for one, but two, I was a big fan of her pops. You know, her dad, Donny Hathaway, was this phenomenal singer back in my day, and he unfortunately committed suicide when Layla was 10. So I knew I wanted to do the biological link. Do we sound like our parents? Because she sings some of Donnie's songs. She sings them in the same key, with the same inflection, and it's kind of eerie. And so I wanted to include her for that part of the story, like the biological link.
I screened the documentary in class a couple weeks ago called 13th. It's a Netflix documentary. And the style, they use sound bites, and they strung together sound bites throughout the entire documentary.
Uh-huh.
What's your opinion on that style? What do you think of that style? Documentary without
The whole time?
The whole time. And they broke it up a little bit with some graphics, some infographics.
It can be effective. It's really hard. When I was working at 48 Hours in CBS, you had to do the first 3 minutes of the show had to be done that way. they called it a prologue. You know, it's kind of a tease to get you interested in what the story was. And you would have to do it without narration. So you'd be stringing together sound bites, little pieces of sound from archival footage, you know, sound from a newscast, anything to build the story, but without a narration. So I think it can be very effective, but it's really hard to accomplish. You have to get one or two people that know the entire story that you want to tell, and get them to tell it soup to nuts, and then plug them in for all the spaces where you need to move the story along. Sometimes. I mean, I had to pay for Michael Winslow, even though he agreed, but I didn't have to pay as much. And then Layla, Linda Ronstadt, Take Six, they didn't ask for anything in return, money. It just depends. You know, some people are going to stick to their guns and say, this is my livelihood, I want to get paid. And you know, if I want them badly enough, I will pay. So, who's going to come up and tell me about their idea? And let's. I collaborate all the time. I don't know if you guys have seen Tammy Teal Stedman. She's an Oscar winner. She's here today. I usually do my class with her, but I collaborate with her all the time about all sorts of stuff that we have ideas about. So I'd like to use this class time to collaborate. If you tell me your idea, we'll help you move your story along. Who's coming up? Come on. Okay, thanks. So here's the reason why I ask you to come up. First of all, I want to apologize again for not being able. I'm not got a bruised rib. It's really hard for me to stand and bend and all that stuff. So the most important class I ever took in college was a speech class, and that was where you got up in front of the class and you gave a speech about something that was interesting to you. So I had, in that time, I'd hitchhiked from California back to Philly, and so I did my story about hitchhiking. And what I learned from that class has been invaluable to this day for me, which is the people that you're addressing, especially if they're your peeps, you know, they're your equals, they would want you to succeed rather than fail. So you learn that in this speech class, that everybody's rooting for you, not waiting for you to screw up so they can laugh at you. So that knowledge has carried me all these years. I can't tell you how many times I've had to get up in front of a group of people and be in charge of that room, be the leader, just hold forth like today. That speech class was invaluable. So that's why in my classes that I teach at Drexel and here, I always ask people to come up and address the group. It's a great way to start getting comfortable doing that. You'll probably have reason to do it for the rest of your life in one way or another.
Thank you.
Is that enough pressure for you?
So my name is Max. Great to meet you all. Hello, Max. Okay. The documentary I wanted to do is more of a personal story about how I personally have struggled throughout my life to get by with the things I've gone through. When I was 9, my mother was murdered, so you know, life has not been very nice. I struggle with ADHD and ADD, so usually I'll have to have a note card to stay on topic. Very difficult to, you know, just improv this whole documentary right now, I'm not gonna lie. Also just like bullying and, you know, everything about like trying to help people, like get the message out that people go through things and those people need to know that they're not alone. All throughout middle school, I felt like I was alone, and I felt like no one cared. My family, you know, drifted apart after the incident, and I was just sad and depressed. I never knew that other people could go through the same thing and still be okay.
How did you learn that?
I left middle school in 7th grade. I went to a different school, a private school for 2 years, where I really found myself, found who I was. I explored different opportunities in school. I did rocketry for 3 years, and I learned about that, and I learned about sciences. And when I came back, I talked to my school's intervention specialist. Sorry. And, I got into a group, I got counseling, and I got, the group was, I forget the name of the group, but it was for people who had death in the family and how we could all work together and cope with that, with our losses, and how we could, stand together and unify ourselves and just know that, we aren't alone. And the reason I want to do this documentary is to try to get the word out that people that have gone through such a traumatic and awful event, that they have people rooting for them, and they will never be alone.
That's outstanding. So, let's show him some love in here too. How do you think his story could be best told? What would you like to see in that story? Character development? How about some specific things? Like, what would you like to see him, include in that story?
I think like the perspectives of other people that had the same experience.
That's exactly what I think. Like, your story could well be, in my mind, about people who have lost someone dear to them. Like, I would love to hear, not in a voyeuristic way, but just in a sympathetic way, your personal story. I'd like to hear the stories of the people around you that have experienced similar loss. And then I'd like to see how the support thing works, and hear from you as the narrator about the very things that you talk.
You have 1 minute, sorry. That was your 1 minute.
That's really? Are you kidding already?
No, but no.
That's only have 1 minute left?
Sorry.
Damn. I mean, darn.
The first one was really long, so I just want to get through it.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to wrap up fast then. To me, really compelling to hear a people story, and the people in his life that showed that they cared, I think would be awesome. Thank you. Have a great day.